Can you push record? There we go. All right, everyone. Hi, my name is Molly Yanis. Thanks for joining this morning. We're going to be talking about my favorite time of the year, strategic annual planning best practices. So just so everyone knows, I am going to record this. I've got 4 people so far that emailed me that they're not going to be able to attend today. So I want to make sure that I can share this content with them. We'll dive right in. So my name is Molly Yanis. I'm the founder of Echo Consulting. We are a project management services firm. We focus on project management, short-term, part-time. We do offer strategic and annual planning services as well, both virtual as well as on-site. We do some program portfolio management, software implementations, process improvement, training and mentorship, and lots of other fun stuff. So for today, please feel free to jump in with any questions. We are going to provide a copy of this presentation, both the audio as well as the slides. And then at the end, we will go ahead and send out a survey requesting feedback. We offer a lot of free webinars, and we're always looking for actionable feedback on how to make them better for our participants. So for today, what to expect, we're going to be talking about preparing for strategic annual planning, setting the right meeting framework. So where we are now, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. And we'll be talking a little bit about strategic alignment. So ensuring that your tactical plan, your forecasted work is actually aligned to the strategic goals of your organization. So this is definitely one of the areas that I'm very passionate about. So we'll be talking a little bit about strategic. So to start us off, we'll talk about what a strategic plan is and what it is not versus what an annual plan is. So a strategic plan, when we think about this is the goal to sustain the company's vision. This is typically a 3 to 5 year viewpoint, depending on the maturity of an organization. So these span multiple years and they're longer term objectives. Okay. With an annual plan, this tends to be a more tactical roadmap for execution of proposed work. It typically follows a fiscal year for budgeting cycle. Again, all of this is dependent upon the organization itself and the maturity on how they go ahead and kind of govern their planning mechanisms. But I do want to just clarify that strategic plan is something that is different than the annual plan, but obviously we need to bridge those gaps to make sure that when you are building a tactical roadmap, that you are also aligning that work to the strategic goals of your organization in a very clearly articulated way. Annual planning is a great opportunity for socializing those strategic goals, any pivots that need to happen. So we'll be talking about some of the methods that we use to make sure that our annual plan is aligned with our strategic plan. Any questions on that? All right, so today our focus at Echo Consulting is on what we call strategic annual planning. So we want to make sure that we're constantly aligning the tactical plan to the strategic goals of the organization. So there's a couple of prerequisites, right? An organization needs to have a clearly articulated strategic goals and objectives that the wider organization is aware of. And the tactical plan has to map back to those strategic goals of the organization. So towards that end, we're going to talk a little bit about preparation for a strategic annual planning exercise for your organization. So when we think about strategic annual planning, first we break it down into who, what, where, when, why, right? Who are we going to include? What are we going to cover as part of strategic annual planning? Where are we going to have this on-site, virtual? This has been like a major concern for a lot of our clients last year, just being like they used to do off-sites. How are we really digging in deep in a virtual environment? So we'll talk about some of those strategies here, when to host this, and why are we dedicating time to strategic annual planning? We've definitely talked with clients that are just like, so much effort, it changes in 2 seconds afterwards. COVID was definitely like, oh, we had this great strategic annual plan, March hit and everything was out the window. Why did we even go through that? So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those concerns now on why you need to dedicate time to strategic annual planning. So why? A lot of words on this slide, I'm sorry. So why are we dedicating the time? Annual planning is a fantastic opportunity to realign the work that your team is doing behind the strategic goals. It's a great time for any pivoting and course correcting and really get your communication right behind what those strategic goals are, why they're important, and why every single member of your team and your organization needs to be aware of those strategic goals and why they're working towards them. This is really an opportunity to I call it stop, drop, and roll, but to be proactive versus reactive, right? To take a moment, take a breath, and really look forward. Is your plan going to get executed exactly the way that you initially think about it few months before the year? No, but that's not the reason why you do this. The reason why you do this is so that you have a clear target, you have the team aligned before what you're fighting for, so that everyone can move forward in the same direction. There will always be times where there's constant change and you need to be reactive. It's a great opportunity for retrospective to really apply your lessons learned. Obviously, Echo Consulting, we're a huge fan of doing retrospectives throughout. We don't want to wait a year or to the end of the project to apply our lessons learned. But this is really a great opportunity as an organization, as a leadership team, as a management team to really think about what worked well, what didn't work well, how we're going to adjust to optimize for the next year. So where are we now, right? Like baseline where are we going? And that is a look and feel, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about defining success, but it's going to be like, what does success look like? What does success feel like to our team? And how are we going to get there? So when we think about planning, and I mentioned this when I talked about strategic plan versus the annual plan, every planning exercise, regardless of how big or how small, has a strategic component to it, a tactical component to it, and budget can be rolled up under tactical. But for all my CFO partners out there is a budgeting component to this as well. So whether we're talking budgeting for resourcing or capital expenses, there does need to be that thread as well, and it typically needs to be pulled out from the tactical work planning. Make sense? So the what? Strategic, tactical, budget. There can be additional levels there as well. We'll talk about culture and other components of this, but those are the three big buckets that we use at Echo Consulting. Okay. So who should be included? This is a great question and I get it a lot. And it really depends on the size and maturity of an organization and the culture. So oftentimes when we're doing an annual planning exercise, there are multiple different phases depending on the person's role. So typically when we think about that strategic plan component, making sure that we're still aligned on that strategic plan, typically that is, a senior leadership C-suite, depending on the organization side, conversation first to really kick it off and make sure that that vision and mission and everything are aligned and that any pivots in that strategic plan are communicated down. But there's also a conversation that needs to happen at a leadership team or department leads, definitely at a resource management side of things, depending on where your budget falls, definitely budget owners and components like that. So typically what you're looking for is a phased annual planning rollout that includes the strategic component, breaking it down into bigger chunks in the organization level, and then down to your budget owners and your resource managers for the more granular tactical components of that to really understand. So some organizations call it like that growth and renewal or technical debt, or you could consider it, if you have compliance concerns, so components that are absolutely required for day-to-day business versus how are we going to continue to optimize and improve and really bring the efficiency of our organization as a whole to the next level, right? So there's kind of those different components for that. So again, I typically recommend a phased rollout here. So senior level, strategic planning, then a more tactical overview, and then the actual more budgeted concrete components of it. Where? This is a question we're getting a lot right now. So If possible, the best practices recommendation is to find a space outside of your office, definitely. A place that doesn't have internet access is always a great place to find, so that you can really disconnect and focus. Typically, these exercises, can be a couple of days spread out, again, depending on the size of the team and how many different phases you're going to walk through this. We have been running some of these virtually with COVID. So definitely utilizing Teams or Zoom or some other conference platform that your team is familiar with. One of the big issues that we've seen come up is that people are using a new platform, people are not familiar with it, and it really cuts back on the efficiency of the online the online component of it. It is absolutely critical to break up to prep breakout sessions and exercises ahead of time. You cannot just count on I'm a huge fan of sticky notes and whiteboards and so definitely being very disciplined and having multiple different exercises and ways that you could go about it to be flexible. We do utilize virtual whiteboarding tools like Mural, definitely shared documents and things like that. Virtual meetings require an incredible amount of prep um, to be really interactive with your team. We use a lot of polls or surveys or require people to provide feedback as you go. So everyone has to post in the chat or something like that to really make sure that you're calling people out of their comfort zone and getting that feedback. So when possible, not COVID, space outside of the office, definitely virtual. This is where I would definitely recommend a lot of prep, making sure you have an annual plan lead that can prep that exercise to make it really helpful. And then finally, when this is the probably least question that we get, but typically it starts the last quarter of your fiscal year for your organization. Again, depending on the organization, I have one very large client right now that's probably about 5 months out for their fiscal year and they're already starting to organize it. So October is a typical time frame if your fiscal year starts on January 1st. That being said, even last year, I think we were asked in to do annual planning in January when their fiscal year had already started. So if you haven't done annual planning, if you have a seasonal business where you've kind of missed your opportunity, that's okay. But there's still an important to, stop, take a breath, do the annual planning, make sure that you're aligned on your strategic goals, and then go from there. So couple other notes of points of note. So communicate who is responsible for pulling statistics or report necessary to make meetings effective. So that's when we think about where we are now, having a baseline, looking at your fiscal year so far, year over year. Every organization is different in terms of what data they have available, but making sure that we understand who is responsible for pulling those statistics. One of the pain points that we've heard is that we're having a C-suite meeting, but the information is coming from the directors or the leaders or something like that. They don't have it prepped for the meeting and it really is not as effective. So making sure that everyone has their information, has it passed out ahead of these meetings. Sending out surveys and tools in advance. Another pain point we run into is people are trying to use new tools because they're like, oh, we're having this virtual meeting, like let's use a new tool. And none of the participants know how to use it and they run into a bunch of tech difficulties. So it's really important that you're doing your prep, you do those surveys, you get the feedback, you spend the time to really put them together and get them out before actually trying to execute on a virtual meeting. So agenda, outline, structure, project management hat on, but a plan for how your annual planning should happen and what the due dates are and when the different teams should be. So I know that it changes, that's okay, but having an idea of what this is supposed to look like and people understand why due dates are important because it's going to impact other people on the team. Any questions or anyone else have other additional preparation for annual planning feedback they want to provide? All right, so let's talk about meeting framework. We mentioned this earlier, so really simplified. Where are we now? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? So when we think about where we are now, so this is current state. These are trends that you might be seeing in your market, competitors, reviewing stats from previous year or year over year, understanding like this is important too, defining the baseline from a culture standpoint, how your organization is, how your employee happiness is, your client satisfaction, net promoter scores, all that other stuff. What is your baseline? Yes, we have small organizations and small teams. It's like we don't really have the data. Like we don't have. That's okay. You can use surveys. You can use subject matter experts on your team. But really understanding what is our baseline, where are we today. It doesn't have to be just a list of all the things we could have done or should have done, etc. But it should be like, where are we today, and feeling good that the whole team can nod along and saying, yes, I feel good. This is where we are today. We are defined the current state. Okay. Reaffirming purpose. This goes back to that strategic planning piece of it, but making sure is everyone aligned on vision, mission, and values. This is a great opportunity, especially for organizations that are growing or have a lot of attrition right now. Making sure that you use the opportunity of annual planning to really hit home on what the strategic vision and the strategic goals of your organization are. So making sure that your vision is aligned, your mission and your values, and that everyone in your organization is familiar with those and how they roll up to this component. So it's a reaffirming a purpose. This is great for new team members that have joined over the last year that might have done orientation, but really haven't had that opportunity to really see that in play. Where are we going? All right, this is the good stuff, guys. So we always want to think about short-term versus long-term strategic initiatives. So it's great to have strategic initiatives that can be completed in a year. But oftentimes we're having strategic initiatives that are going to span multiple years and cross multiple years. But it's important to have them in play as part of the annual planning, right? Annual planning is not just for work that is going to be completed within that year. It's going to be work that is prepped or dependent on work that is happening in that year. So we are going to be seeing those strategic initiatives, strategic goals, objectives, whatever the way your organization calls them, that span multiple years included in the work that needs to happen. So again, project management hat, right? But it's like, and no one thinks the project is red until you're within a month of go live, right? This is really important that we're doing that prep for those strategic goals every single year, and we understand how it rolls up. So defining the purpose and position, this is something I talk and coach a lot of teams on. So what does success look like and feel like, and defining it? So when you come back around to this meeting and you're having this annual meeting and you're communicating the results, what is that going to feel like? So one of those kind of feel good exercises that depends on the organization culture, but I sometimes do with them is like, writing a letter to, your company a year from now. Like, what will you have accomplished in that year, and what does it feel like? And it's not necessarily specific tactical work that's being completed. It's a little bit more hand waving, feel good, like this is where we will be as a team. So this is where oftentimes cultural impact and leadership messaging can come in really handy. So where is your company amongst competitors? Where are they in the community that they're in? Where are your employees in terms of there's been promotions in-house, or there's additional training, and there's a lot of different pieces here, but oftentimes I see the most successful messages with this purpose and position are these leadership messages that really have that feeling of what we're going to feel like as an organization. All right, so we're going to talk about some of those exercise examples that we set up. We'll do a couple of the basic ones and then some of the ones that Echo really loves. So SWOT analysis, it's a classic: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is primarily an exercise that we do with the strategic planning side of things versus the tactical, to be honest, but it definitely translates into tactical. This is a great exercise if you're feeling like, wow, I really don't have the data I need to articulate what my current state is. Like, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are those pain points? So doing an employee survey on what are the pain points, what are our opportunities, understanding the threats, making sure that your entire leadership team is really up to date on current states, like doing some of that competitive research. Again, take a breath and be proactive and think about planning. Obviously, these change over time, but annual planning is a great opportunity to really get in the right rhythm of looking at this. So we provided a really quick example, right? So strengths, high quality product, client satisfaction, client referral, opportunities, emerging need for service, contract expert for optimize, weaknesses. We don't have a great consumer audience, poorly. So this is just an example, very, very high level for SWOT example. There's tons of information online about SWOT. I don't want to spend too much time on that. This is a basic exercise we do with a lot of teams, anywhere down from like a feature specific functional capability all the way to like strategic planning. So what are we going to start doing in the next year? What are we going to stop doing? What are we going to continue? This fits in really well with retrospectives or lessons learned, and especially can be good for cultural conversations, positioning, again, higher level conversations. So what are we going to start? What are we going to stop? And what are we going to continue? So I actually do a lot of, you can do this whether or not you're virtual or not, but I actually have like note cards and things like that we use with our team. So you can say, all right, this is one of our processes that we tried out this year. And then you have your team on the line all have to either hold up a stop, start, or continue at the same time. So I just say 3, 2, 1, everyone put it up. It's really interesting to see how different people react, and it forces everyone to put their vote in. So again, stop, start, continue to really get a baseline for your organization on moving forward with new processes. So hedgehog concept, I think Melissa sent this out earlier. We'll give you an example in Mural. So what drives our economic engine? What are we deeply passionate about, and what are we best at? And then finding those overlaps. And so when you think about all of the ideas that come forth with annual planning, whether those are projects, whether those are business efficiency initiatives, whether those are upgrades or new clients or whatever those are, right? Finding what that best mix is, that prioritization framework, can be really difficult for organizations. And again, especially when you can't be on site together and do your sticky note exercise, how do we actually really identify what those kind of core, most important work efforts are for the year? So I'm just going to bring up a Mural example really quickly. Let me make sure that this is still sharing. Melissa, am I sharing? Am I sharing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so this is one of the tools that we use for one of our clients. It's called Mural. And what it does is it allows you to set up exercises ahead of time, and you can use little sticky notes, for example, and type up different ideas. So a couple of different ways that we've used this here at Echo Consulting. So we've started from a point of a survey to gather people's ideas. We've started from a point of spreadsheets or Smartsheet or a team survey on Microsoft Forms. So we start gathering ideas and information, and then what we do is we actually either have someone enter it into Mural. You can upload it from an Excel, for example. And what you do is you start grouping ideas that are similar to each other. And then we start thinking about where they fit on a greater matrix, and how you build out that matrix can be completely dependent on your organization and what you're focused on. So maybe your strategic objectives have to do primarily with client satisfaction and brand expanded brand presence, and whatever your specific organization are, starting to look at how those different projects and ideas and initiatives play into those larger strategic buckets. Okay, so we've done this many different ways, but this is where I say when I'm talking about the preparation for annual planning, it's really important that you set up an environment, you've set up exercises, you've brought in this data before you actually sit down for an annual planning session. Okay. So I'm going to get out of that. So this is just a hedgehog concept. I like this, although I do sometimes tweak what those buckets are, and I've seen this with 4 or 5 circles as well. And so one of the things just to mention to you, Melissa has been very kind and added some tool tips into this presentation with links to articles and things like that. So you're welcome to do some additional research. Oh, this is project. Unless you have a definite, precise, and clearly set goals, you are not going to realize the maximum potential that lies within you. So one of my favorite quotes or concepts is like, it's hard to hit a moving target, but it's impossible to hit a target that doesn't exist, right? So having a plan, having a goal, having that articulated, having one behind that doesn't mean it's not going to change, but it does mean that you're at least faced in the right direction, and it gives you a place to track against. Basic concepts, SMART goals. So when I start thinking about collecting information, whether it's from the department leads or if I'm opening it up to the entire organization, and we think about what these are, starting to hone in on things that are specific, measurable. This is something that's really hard, especially for small organizations that are, don't have as much data. Attainable, relevant, and timely. Right. So attainable, obviously, really important that it's something that is something everyone can get behind. So a couple of smart examples, right? So really focusing in on that measurable component, achievable, attainable, and then time bound. So really making sure that you have clearly articulated what that time is. One of the pieces that I will mention here is that you want to get information in early, and then progressively elaborate on those ideas. You don't want to cause the form that you're intaking information in or the way that you're asking for feedback to block people because they feel like they don't have enough information to share it yet. So you constantly are having to play that balance of having enough information that is useful and relevant, but not too much information that you're not getting good visibility into the ideas of your organization because it's requiring too much prep work in order to submit an idea. We're going to talk about just some of the really basic high level concepts for strategic planning and like objectives, and how organizations set. So OKRs is a very common one, objectives and key results. So it's an objective. This is kind of typically more the strategic plan level, and it has key results as measurements of success. So I think several of our clients use the OKR method. So it's that overall direction, strategic plan of the business. Where are we headed towards? What are the specific measurable targets, and how you're progressing towards your objective, right? So this is really important, that exact, like, what does success look like? How is it defined? How will we know when we hit it? And also like putting timelines to that. It's like, this is when we're expecting to have that. Yes, it might change, but don't hesitate to put a line in the sand, something to target, understanding that it can move. So we'll talk a little bit about governance and the fact that things do move, and that's okay. That's normal. So objective, grow my business, not my favorite one. Achieve 3 million in annual revenue, launch a new product, reduce churn 5% annually. So we're using really high level examples here, guys, because it's a webinar. So we definitely dig in a lot deeper with clients when we're starting to use different frameworks, but we want to get a high level idea here. V2 Mom, this was a new one that Melissa dug up. I have actually not used this with a client yet, but I loved it so much that I included it anyways. So vision, what's your goal? Values, why is it important to you? So talking about why something's important, why you're passionate about it. Methods, so how are you going to reach it? This is the tactics. Obstacles, what are standing in your way? And measures, how you'll know that you're successful, right? And again, scope, schedule, budget, absolutely, but also, cultural impacts and longer term components as well. Um, so I'm going to let you guys read through this later on. I don't need to go too deep. We're giving you some high level examples. You're welcome to look up V2 Mom. There's a lot of information in Google. Our goals can only be reached through a vehicle of a plan in which we must fervently believe and upon which we must vigorously act. There is no other route to success, according to Picasso. So y'all know that I love a good plan, and understanding that it constantly changes, and that is okay. So how are we going to get there? So I'm going to keep harping on this, setting measurable goals, whether it's an amount, whether it's dates, whether it's targets, whether it's estimates, whether it's a percent difference of, from year over year, really forcing your team into being a more measurable component, and milestones, so actions, achievements, deliverables, what is going to make progress towards your goal, and how are you going to know that you're making enough progress that you're going to hit that annual target? So what I oftentimes see is people will put either quarterly or annual targets, and then they don't know that they didn't hit it or any progress until you get to the next year, right? So what specific actions, achievements, deliverables, who's going to be assigned to those, to really make progress towards your goals? Resource management. This is, I'm going to be honest, I have clients anywhere from 15 people to 7,500 people, and forecasting budget, identifying capital expenditures, looking at resourcing and how resourcing is going to play into the work that's operational versus project-based work. This is hard. And there isn't a one size fit all tool for this, and there isn't a one size fit all process for this. But it is important that as an organization, you are constantly optimizing and constantly improving. It's okay if you didn't have any forecasts last year. I mean, hopefully your business is doing okay and you have budgets that you're tracking towards, but like it's okay to start from where you are now. But understanding what you think is going to happen, putting numbers to some of these ideas that you have in place, and tracking forecasts to actuals on a consistent basis is really critical, and starting from somewhere. Um, so identifying capital expenditures, again, depending on the size of your organization, if you're looking for funding, if you're looking for, cash flow for some of our organizations that really have a strong seasonal component of it, it's really important to track this. So understanding if you're going to need contractors, if you're going to have some, major staffing changes throughout the year, really looking at what this resource management plan is. This is one of the main reasons that I highly recommend that you have someone in your organization that is assigned to the annual planning process. Typically, organizations assign this to the finance department because they're just looking at it from the budgeting component. I've seen really successful annual planning experts be anywhere from finance to HR. IT oftentimes in larger organizations plays a big part in this, but I've really seen a couple of great HR people and ops people that really led this this initiative for annual planning, because they have that little bit of a broader perspective than just the budget component, or just the IT capital expenditures. Okay. Or manufacturing expenditures. All right. Just going to let this sit for now. Just say no. So I have lots of clients that approve 95% of the proposed work that they have for the annual plan. And they're not they don't execute any more than someone that actually, said no, and really thought about what their resourcing was. You need to think about your capacity buffers here. You need to think about your worst case. We have that natural bias as humans to think things are going to go better. But it's really important that not only are you able to say no to initiatives that don't make sense or maybe later, but that you communicate that no out, and that you recognize that someone provided the idea, that you recognize someone cared about that, and that you're clearly communicating, either no or not right now, and the reasoning why, and trying to bring that reasoning why back to the strategic goals of your organization, right? It's not just comparing Peter versus Paul, but it's like, no, because this doesn't fit in our strategic plan. This doesn't match with this goal. This is a great idea, but this isn't where our organization is headed. And having the ability to say no and communicate no to your team. You can disagree, but then you need to buy in and move forward with, this is what our plan is for the year. So it's really important that you have a mechanism to say no, and that you have people on your team that are able to say no, to things that just don't make sense and or won't fit for the year. Oh, one of my favorites. Pivot, pivot. All right, so if you've seen this iconic episode of Friends, we'll know that pivoting isn't always easy. I'm sure you've all experienced that with COVID and all the other things going on with business right now. This is a little bit distracting, so I'll go back. But understanding the strategic vision and goals and things like will pivot, and you will think that you're going to be able to accomplish something, and something is going to take a different amount of time. We're going to dive right into change management right after this, but it's important that when you are making a pivot, that you're not just talking about the actual execution and tactical components of it, but you're drawing it back to the strategic alignment component of, you know what I mean? Like, we're pivoting our organization because of this, this, and this. Like, these are our strategic goals. And that is why we're choosing to do one thing versus another. So this is where I want to talk just very briefly about governance. So when we think about governance, there needs to be people and processes to act as a guide when we are making those pivots, when we are course correcting, right? Sometimes that is senior leadership or C-level, again, depending on your organization. Sometimes it can be, a group of specific subject matter experts that are really leading certain initiatives within the organization. Like I've seen it a couple of different ways, but how often is this governance board going to meet? Is it a quarterly check-in to see where you're hitting on your targets? Is it monthly? Is it bi-weekly? Like, what is that governance cadence? And what is that governance board authorized to do to help and to provide value to the organization about, the annual planning? So there's definitely like that diminishing returns, which is planning is great, but we can't plan every single step because things are going to change and we don't want to waste time. But not planning at all, it can provide like a huge handicap to our organization. So this is like one of my favorite classic examples. So I talk about governance in the way that I think about like bumper bowling versus like traditional bowling, right? Like governance should act as those bumpers to make sure that you're not completely off track, so that when you hit against that bumper, you pivot and you go back to the other side, you go back onto the lane, right? So those are really the protectors of your strategic goals and the people that should be escalating to the senior leadership and or board, you know what I mean, if the organization is really going off track. But they're not people that should be like digging in and auditing on a specific project level or organization's budget. So I think about it as like the bumpers, right? Like they're not the person that are like throwing the ball, they're not the pins, but there's those bumpers that keep you from completely going off the rail. So what I'd like to see as an output of annual planning is a roadmap. I've seen lots of different versions of this, but typically it's going to have at least a year, sometimes a little bit more, because sometimes the annual plan is going to include a quarter in the past and a quarter in the future, just to kind of give yourself a little bit of that overlap there. I'd like to see both the strategic initiatives, like the longer programmatic changes, and then specific milestones to target again, so that how to tell when you're off track. And I would like to see this updated. So typically for an organization, my recommendation is at least a quarterly update. That quarterly update should go to every level that was involved in the annual planning. It typically should include the entire organization as well. And you want to provide a roadmap visual that shows where you are in the process, where we are today, where we're heading, and what changed. Okay. So lots of different road mapping tools we've used. This is just an example out of PowerPoint. So take a breath. Strategic alignment. It is so important to have a communication plan. How much information is being shared and with who and what time? What communication methods are you using? Are these emails? Are these announcements? Are these, you know, notifications? Are these visuals? Are you sharing them on the intranet? Like who's being shared with and what documents are going to be included as part of this, right? Like the annual budgeting tool. Is there going to be a resource forecasting tool? Is there going to be, you know what I mean, some sort of form to take ideas? Like, is once you actually use a mural or a whiteboard or OneNote or whatever tool you use to collaborate, how is that getting translated into deliverables that can be sent further out? Who's responsible for that? So it's really important to have a plan and think about your communication methods. And then honestly, how are we going to track it and update it regularly, right? An annual plan is a one-time view of like what the year looks like, but are you going to continue to update it and use that as a tool for your organization to align over time? Or is that a one-time plan and you're just comparing it with another one-time plan? So a lot of organizations create an annual plan. It is the annual plan and that's it. Um, a more mature organization is having a plan, updating on a regular cadence, and tracking against the baseline that they have set to understand why that changed, and tracking those decisions. Okay. Who wants change? Everyone. Who wants to change? No one. Who wants to lead change? All right. So with annual planning, there's change management associated with this, right? Whether that's a change of the strategic plan, whether you need to roll out the tactical plan and the tools associated with it. So how are we going to lead people to achieve these outcomes, right? How are we going to get there? And that requires change management. And when you're doing annual planning, it is important to understand that people have a certain threshold for change. And when you are trying to overlap multiple changes on top of each other, every variable adds additional complexity and can cause people to burn out, right? Like big word right now, right? So we need to think about change management, the process of change management, and the time associated with change management. Make sure we're adding some buffers in there, recognizing when changes can be bundled together to be a little bit more accessible to your team, and when changes need to be spread apart so that your team has time to acclimate over time. Okay. So when we think about this, 7 R's of change management, this is a great place to start. So risks, the reason, why is the change happening? What are the risks of making these change? Who are the resources involved and are going to be needed to make this change? When was this change raised? What's the return on the change? Who's responsible for it? What is the relationship? So there's a lot more information to this. I think we have a resource on it, but really it comes down to is how are you fostering the buy-in to the change, right? What is the motive of the change? How are we communicating it? What does success look and feel like? Anticipate that there will be opposition and include the opposition in the change. Use their subject matter expertise, use their platform to really develop champions within your team. How does the change relate to the strategic goals and missions of your organization? You've heard me say that a million different times, but like, how does this change roll up to where our organization is going and why we're moving there? And then understand that you have to listen and adapt. You have to acknowledge that there's going to be opposition. You have to acknowledge that people are nervous in situations. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to set out a plan. It's going to change. Being okay with that, and especially as a leader, being okay with that, and then encouraging your team to be okay with that as well. Whew. Questions? So I'm going to take a second. I just put a lot of information out there. I am going to provide the slides. Please don't hesitate to reach out one-on-one as well if you have any specific questions, you want to talk in more detail on any of the topics today. If you're interested in bringing an outside facilitator to plan your annual planning, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to. We love annual planning. If you enjoyed this event and want more, we are doing a couple of additional webinars coming up. All of our webinars are free. So best practices for leading impactful meetings, introduction to change management. And so definitely let us know if you want updates on upcoming webinars. You can follow us on LinkedIn, and we have a lot of contact information here. All right. Any questions, anything anyone wanted to offer that maybe we didn't cover, and or any thoughts that you would like to share with the group? All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.